I know about infiltration of KGB into peace movement probably as much as an average American who reads newspapers systematically. But obviously I'm aware that the World Peace Council is a front organization of the KGB. Ramesh Chandra I know personally, both in India and USSR. I worked with delegations of various peaceniks who came to the World Congress of Peace Council in Moscow. I think it was in 1961 or 62. Yeah, it was before Cuban crisis. And at that time they struck me as people who are pathologically unable to see the truth, not to talk about the military aspects. When as a translator and a guide, I used to take them to places in Moscow which are not supposed to be for foreigners' eyes. They didn't want to see it. They had their preconceived ideas. They were suffering from self-importance. They thought it's a great honor to sit in the Kremlin, in the Palace of Congresses, next to a debil from Kremlin, and talk about peace as if that person from Politburo means anything in peace movement. Self-delusion is the most predominant phenomenon among these people. Ramesh Chandra is a very shrewd politician who takes advantage of naive, misguided, idealistically minded, sometimes sincere people. But he is, my impression is that he's totally sold himself to the Soviets. He receives his payments or royalties or whatever you can call it in the form of prizes. Of course, it's very embarrassing if you approach a person of his caliber with money, with cash, and say, "Here, Comrade Ramesh Chandra, there is money for your propaganda in the interests of the Soviet Union." It's very unpolite. So instead, the Soviet Union creates artificial international bodies such as Jawaharlal Nehru Peace Committee, which consists of various progressive leaders, writers. Sometimes they're known figures and philosophers, educationalists. Sometimes they probably feel that if there's no other possibility to express the desire for peace, at least there is some legitimate overt activity where they can express themselves. That's okay. And they think they are too smart not to see that part of it is Soviet propaganda. They think, okay, we are smart. We are not going to allow them to use us for propaganda purposes. This is wishful thinking, because after 5 or 6 visits to USSR, everything is paid by the Soviet government. After spending several vacations on a Black Sea coast in luxurious atmosphere with 2 or 3 nice girls, interpreters, lots of vodka and caviar, books published, vapid books which nobody reads in the United States, all of a sudden published in millions of copies in USSR in various languages. That tickles their ego. They think they're somebodies all of a sudden. It's difficult to resist the temptation. Ramesh Chandra is exactly that type of personality. He was approached at a very early stage, and he didn't have willpower and moral principles to resist the temptation, to resist the approach. And by now he's just a pawn in the game, high-ranking pawn. And if he is dismissed or dies natural death, there will be another, the line of people who would like to take his place. Yes, KGB takes very active part in the peace movement, and if these people were sincere as they say they are, they would start demonstrating in Kremlin, or I mean in Red Square, not in Washington, D.C., or in the Central Park in New York, or in Los Angeles. But they don't have courage, they don't have guts to go to Russia and protest against the nuclear armament of the Soviet Union. Therefore, I agree that they are misguided, but I think they are cowards. They are unprincipled, dishonest people. And there's no justification that they are misguided or poorly informed. It's their fault that they're poorly informed. There's enough information, there's enough possibility, In case of United States citizens, there's enough freedom to do what their consciousness should tell them to do. Go to Russia and protest against armament. It doesn't take much courage to take part in demonstration in Los Angeles. But if you're really genuinely concerned about peace, tell it to Brezhnev, tell it to Andropov, and we'll see how courageous and sincere you are. They don't do it. Well, the greatest strength, I think, is the basic principle of American democracy, common sense, and the value of the principles of private property and respect to human dignity and individual rights. The weakness is the permissiveness and lack of moral stamina, which, if you are a religious person, could be interpreted as probably alienation from religion, alienation from God. Thinking too much in materialistic terms, thinking in short span of time for pragmatic advantages, disregarding the perspective of civilization. Some philosopher, I forget his name, I was a bad student in Moscow, said that the level of civilization is in direct proportion to the time span that human being thinks in future, for future. The least civilized people live today, this minute. The more civilized nations think about tomorrow, 10 years from now, 100 years from now. Well, this is one of the definitions of... Unfortunately, Americans are made to think in shorter and shorter time span terms. This is the greatest weakness. So therefore, enjoy life and make love, not war. I think that willpower and revitalization of traditional moral values and principles is the most desirable thing now, today. The sooner the better. The things, the principles and values on which the affluence and success of American civilization depends and based upon should be immediately revitalized and brought back to school programs, to media, and let's face it, propaganda. I'm not afraid of this word, unlike the left liberal journalists who think, oh, well, it's propaganda. I don't see anything wrong in propagating the basic moral principles and values on which America is built. Willpower, faith, unshakable faith that this country, this civilization is right and the enemy is wrong. No amount or no number of nuclear warheads and no size of the army will help United States to survive, whether there is nuclear war or conventional warfare. Vietnam proved very clearly that with all the technology, with all the supersonic bombers and napalm and whatnot, electronic gadgets and cold beer and Coca-Cola, you cannot defeat an enemy unless you are fighting and have faith in the righteousness of your fight. So that's the most urgent thing, I think. Wake up and convince yourself that you're on the right side. There should not be no neutralism or objectivity. Or objectivity is good when you are discussing philosophical concepts. In today's world, if you are neutral, you are already an enemy of your own country. You have to actively take part of your country, your side. One of the reasons of my defection is that I took side. I was decided to take part, to take choice, to make my own personal choice. For some strange reason today it's very fashionable, it's considered to be an intellectual chic, not to take sides. Academic media, academic circles, Hollywood stars, politicians, they think it's very fashionable, it's intellectual to be non-allied, non-committed, neutral. It's not intellectual, it's suicidical. Suicidal.